For a time beyond memory, humanity lived under a great and constant shadow. This shadow was not cast by clouds or mountains, but by something invisible and profoundly powerful: disease. Sickness arrived without warning, a silent predator moving through homes and villages with devastating speed. Entire families could vanish in a single season, their laughter replaced by a heavy, sorrowful quiet. Communities that had thrived for generations could be brought to their knees. This was the world before the protection of vaccines, a world where the simplest cough or fever could signal the beginning of the end. People lived with a deep and persistent fear of the unseen. In this age, life was fragile, and its length was often determined by chance. A cut from a farming tool, a shared cup of water, a simple breath of air. In a crowded market, parents watched over their children with a mixture of love and dread, knowing that many would not reach adulthood. The Great Plagues and pandemics are recorded in our history books, but countless smaller, unwritten tragedies played out in homes across the globe every day. People turned to prayers, to folk remedies, and to desperate measures. But the shadow of rampant infectious disease remained. The rhythm of society was often dictated by the arrival and departure of sickness. Markets would close, towns would be sealed, travelers would be turned away. At the gates, hospitals, where they existed, were often places not of healing, but of last resort, where the sick were isolated to die. It was a world desperately in need of a new kind of hope. Among the many diseases that haunted the world, one was particularly feared for its cruelty and its reach. Its name was smallpox. This was not a quiet or subtle illness. It announced its arrival with a high fever, terrible aches, and vomiting. Then came the rash, which covered the body in fluid-filled sores. For those who survived, the disease left a permanent and brutal signature, deep, pitted scars known as pox that forever marked the skin. Many survivors were left blind. For countless others, there was no survival at all. Smallpox was an unyielding killer of children and adults alike, respecting no borders and no social class. In the crowded cities of Europe, Asia, and the Americas, the virus spread like wildfire through the populace. It moved from person to person through the air or by touch, a relentless and efficient invader. Hospitals filled to overflowing, and the streets often echoed with the sound of funeral bells. Families would bar their doors, hoping to keep the sickness out, but it often found a way in. The fear was palpable. The sight of the distinctive rash on a loved one's skin was a sentence of probable death or disfigurement. People tried many things to stop its advance, from burning contaminated bedding to ancient practices of inoculation that were themselves incredibly risky. This ancient practice, known as variolation, involved taking material from the sores of a smallpox victim and introducing it into a healthy person. The hope was that this would cause a milder form of the disease and grant future immunity. Sometimes it worked, but often it triggered a full, raging case of smallpox, killing the patient and starting a new outbreak in the community. It was a desperate gamble, a choice between a high chance of contracting the disease naturally and a smaller but still significant chance of contracting it deliberately. This terrible choice revealed just how powerless people felt in the face of this relentless plague. The impact of smallpox was so profound that it altered the course of human history. It is believed to have killed hundreds of millions of people over the centuries, more than all the wars of the 20th century combined. It toppled empires and cleared the way for conquests as it ravaged populations that had no prior exposure to the virus. For generations, humanity was locked in a seemingly endless battle with this single disease. There was an urgent, desperate need for a safer, more reliable way to fight back. The world was waiting for a new idea, one that would come not from a grand university, but from the quiet observations of a country doctor. In the rolling green hills of late 18th century Gloucestershire, England, a thoughtful and observant man practiced medicine. His name was Edward Jenner. He was not a physician in a grand city hospital, but a local doctor who knew the people of his rural community intimately. He treated their ailments, delivered their babies, and listened to their stories. And in his daily work, he began to notice a curious pattern, a piece of local folklore that many had dismissed but which Jenner found fascinating. He saw that the dairymaids, the young women who milked the cows each day, seemed to be mysteriously protected from the horrors of smallpox. These milkmaids were not entirely untouched by disease. They often contracted a much milder illness from the cows they tended. This sickness was called cowpox. It caused a few blisters on their hands and a slight fever, but it was not dangerous. The illness would pass quickly, leaving them with little more than a story to tell. Yet, during the terrifying smallpox epidemics that swept through the countryside, these same women would walk among the sick, tending to their families without fear. It seemed that their brief encounter with the gentle cowpox had granted them a shield against the far deadlier smallpox. Jenner wondered if this was more than just a coincidence. The idea was revolutionary, yet simple. What if the mild cowpox disease could act as a form of protection? What if, by deliberately giving a person this harmless sickness, one could train their body to fend off the lethal one? This was a radical departure from the dangerous practice of variolation, which used the smallpox virus itself. Jenner's hypothesis suggested that a related but far safer disease could provide the key. He spent years observing, taking meticulous notes, and strengthening his theory. He knew that to prove his idea, he would need to move from observation to experimentation. He would need to conduct a test that was both brave and ethically perilous. Jenner's mind was consumed by this possibility. He saw the potential to save millions of lives, to lift the terrible fear of smallpox that hung over every family. But he also understood the immense risk. His reputation, and more importantly, the health of a human subject, would be on the line. The medical establishment was deeply skeptical of folk wisdom and rural tales. To them, the idea that a disease from a farm animal could protect humans from one of history's greatest killers would have seemed absurd. But Jenner's conviction grew stronger with every milkmaid he met, who remained untouched by the scars of smallpox. He was ready to take the next decisive step. The day that would change the history of medicine forever arrived on May 14th, 1796. Edward Jenner decided to put his theory to the ultimate test. His subject was a healthy 8-year-old boy named James Phipps. The boy was the son of Jenner's gardener. Jenner sought out a local milkmaid. Sarah Nelmes had active cowpox sores on her hand. The sores had been contracted from a cow named Blossom. With steady hands, Jenner took a small amount of fluid from one of Sarah's blisters. He then made 2 small cuts on James Phipps's arm and carefully introduced the fluid into the boy's skin. The boy James soon developed the classic signs of cowpox. He had a low fever and felt unwell for a day or two. A small sore developed on his arm where the fluid had been applied. But, as Jenner had seen in the milkmaids, the illness was mild and passed quickly. Within a week, James was back to his normal playful self. The small lesion on his arm began to heal. The first part of Jenner's experiment was a success, but the true test was yet to come. Several weeks later in July, Jenner took matter from a fresh human smallpox sore. He deliberately exposed James Phipps to the virus, the point of no return. If his theory was wrong, the boy would almost certainly develop full-blown smallpox. Jenner watched and waited as the days passed. The boy showed no signs of fever, no rash, no sickness at all. The protection had held. The cowpox had taught the boy's body how to defeat its deadly cousin. Jenner called his method vaccination, from the Latin word vacca, cow. He repeated the experiment on other children. He also tested his own infant son with the same results. He meticulously documented his findings and published a pamphlet titled An Inquiry into the Causes and Effects of the Variolae Vaccinae. His work was the dawn of a new era in medicine. A simple observation in a country field had led to one of the most significant discoveries in human history. At first, Edward Jenner's discovery was met not with universal praise, but with skepticism and even ridicule. The idea of using a disease from an animal to protect humans seemed strange and unnatural to many. Some members of the London medical community dismissed him as a simple country doctor whose ideas were unscientific. Political cartoonists of the day drew pictures of vaccinated people sprouting cow heads from their bodies, stoking public fear and mistrust. It was a difficult and frustrating time for Jenner, who was convinced he held the key to saving countless lives from a terrible fate. He knew that for his idea to succeed, it had to be proven again and again. Despite the initial resistance, Jenner's idea was too powerful to be ignored. A few forward-thinking doctors in London decided to try the procedure for themselves. A few forward-thinking doctors in other parts of Europe decided to try the procedure for themselves. They found, just as Jenner had, that vaccination provided reliable protection against smallpox. It did so without the deadly risks of variolation. In America, President Thomas Jefferson became a strong advocate for vaccination, helping to establish its use in the young nation. The practice slowly but surely gained acceptance as its life-saving results became impossible to deny. The success of vaccination did more than just prevent smallpox. It introduced a revolutionary new concept to the world of medicine. It demonstrated that the human body could be taught to fight a specific disease. This was the birth of immunology, the science of how the body defends itself against infection. Jenner's work laid the foundation for a whole new field of scientific inquiry. It showed that by introducing a harmless version of a pathogen, one could trigger the body's natural defenses and create a lasting memory of the invader. It showed that by introducing a weakened version of a pathogen, one could trigger the body's natural defenses and create a lasting memory of the invader. This simple, elegant principle would become the cornerstone of modern preventive medicine for centuries to come. Jenner's discovery was a pivotal moment marking the transition from ancient remedies to evidence-based science. Nearly a century after Edward Jenner pioneered vaccination, another brilliant scientist in France would take the next great leap forward. His name was Louis Pasteur. Working in the late 1800s, Pasteur was a meticulous chemist and biologist who became fascinated by the world of the very small. Using powerful new microscopes, he was one of the key figures to prove the germ theory of disease. The idea that many illnesses are caused by microscopic living organisms, or germs. This discovery alone revolutionized medicine, but Pasteur did not stop there. He wanted to understand how to control these germs and use them for good. Pasteur's work on vaccines began, much like Jenner's, with a combination of careful observation and a little bit of luck. While studying chicken cholera, a deadly disease in poultry, his team accidentally used an old weakened culture of the bacteria to inject a group of chickens. To their surprise, the chickens became only mildly ill and then recovered. When these same chickens were later exposed to a fresh, virulent batch of the cholera bacteria, they remained completely healthy. Pasteur immediately understood the significance of this accident. He had discovered that he could artificially weaken or attenuate a pathogen so that it would provoke immunity without causing serious illness. Jenner had used a naturally occurring milder disease. Pasteur had shown he could weaken the germ itself. This opened the door to creating vaccines for a vast range of diseases for which there was no convenient cowpox equivalent. He had developed a universal method. He applied this principle to create the first effective vaccines against anthrax in sheep and most famously against rabies in humans, a disease that had been universally fatal. Pasteur's most dramatic success came in 1885 when a 9-year-old boy named Joseph Meister was brought to him after being severely bitten by a rabid dog. Rabies was a death sentence. In a desperate and ethically challenging move, Pasteur administered his new untested rabies vaccine to the boy. The treatment consisted of a series of 13 injections, each containing a progressively less weakened form of the rabies virus. The boy survived. Pasteur's work turned him into an international hero and firmly established the science of vaccination. The foundational work of Jenner and Pasteur ignited a golden age of vaccine development throughout the 20th century. Scientists, armed with a growing understanding of microbiology and immunology, began a systematic campaign against infectious diseases. This period brought a wave of new protections. Vaccines against diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis became routine parts of childhood. Then came the fight against polio. The polio vaccine, first by Jonas Salk in 1955 and later an oral vaccine by Albert Sabin, was met with worldwide celebration. A vaccine for measles arrived in 1963. Vaccines for mumps and rubella followed, often combined into MMR shots. Genetic engineering and molecular techniques now let scientists design vaccines with precision and safety. Instead of whole weakened viruses, tiny pieces like a single protein can teach the immune system, leading to vaccines for hepatitis B and HPV. Of all the triumphs in the history of vaccination, one stands above the rest: the complete eradication of smallpox. In 1967, the World Health Organization launched an intensified global eradication program with an audacious goal, not just to control the disease, but to wipe it from the face of the earth forever. The last naturally occurring case of smallpox was recorded in Somalia in 1977. On May 8, 1980, the World Health Organization officially declared that smallpox had been eradicated. It was the first and, so far, the only human disease to be completely wiped out.